For my money, Gil Fronsdal is the best meditation teacher working in the West today. In other words, if what you want is authentic Buddhist mindfulness meditation instructions that are in no way offensive to a Western secular rationalist mind, then I think you can do no better than Mr. Fronsdal. In other words, Gil Fronsdal is the fucking Buddha.
Okay, so in this video, I'm going to introduce him a bit, talk a bit about him, and then I'm going to walk you through a guided meditation which exemplifies a lot of his approach, right? In which I'll sort of focus on a few of his key techniques. And then at the end, I'll throw in a few little reflections here and there. So Gil Fronsdal is a meditation teacher, mindfulness teacher, who works at the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City, California, in the Bay Area. And Fronsdal has unique and impeccable qualifications. It's really fascinating. So he's an ordained Zen priest, has been for over 40 years through the Berkeley Zen Center. He's learned insight meditation through Jack Kornfield, and has spent 1.5 years as a Theravadan monastic. And he has a PhD in Buddhist studies. Okay, so that's 3 very different streams of Buddhist understanding, right? Japanese Zen, Mahayana, Southeast Asian Theravadan, and, secular academic. And he manages to wed these 3 in this fascinating way, right? Like, if you know quite a lot about meditation, you'll see that in extremely subtle ways he manages to actually bring it all together. It's really, really, really something else, right? Perhaps a quick word about his students, his prominent students who are themselves meditation teachers. First of all, a lot of them seem to be women, which is an important sign in this day and age, right? And secondly, that they're also individual, right? They're all pulling in the same direction, right? Pulling towards the same goal, but their personalities is not just intact, but sort of extremely well developed, right? So I think that's an important thing to note.
Anyway, the thing that really got me into him was that when I started meditating, really seriously a few years ago, as I would do it, I would come across all these little massive insights. So I was reading a lot of books at the time, and the ideas, I was familiar with that, but then I'd sit and I'd be like, well, actually, that's all fine and great, but wait a second, like, there's this thing more important than all of that. There's just this little thing, or more important than all that, like, this is really big annoyance, this really big hindrance that's coming, and actually, if I just do that, then it gets way, way better, right? All these little, subtle little insights, which it would, it seems almost too small to say, right? But then I would listen to him and he would say those exact same things. He would pick out those exact little crucial insights. You see what I mean, right? Things that are seemingly so small and yet so outmodedly big and yet so subtle. And he would pick on exactly those. And he was the only person I came across who would hit those exact things. And that's what really started to get me to really pay attention to him, right? Okay, now here goes. It's end of the introduction. Let me tell you a little bit about my personal take on him. So as I started to listen to him more, I came up with a nickname for him, just to myself. I didn't ever say this to anyone else, but in my own mind, I referred to him as the most boring man in the world. Now, why? So firstly, because he's just so careful, right? So exceedingly careful. And so I mean that kind of in the big scale, right? So with a lot of these, with a lot of spiritual teachers you come across, right? There's a tendency to go big, right? There's a tendency to sort of, go trippy, and he just completely rigorously avoids that. Right? He does the opposite, right? So compared to someone like an Alan Watts, or even, like Artolo or Rupert Spira, he's just so down to earth, so specific, so calm, so matter of fact that it's just like, wow, and but further to the point, he's almost impossible to catch out, like, philosophically. You'll basically he never shows any weaknesses there. He'll never say something that you can then latch onto and be like, well, actually, no. You know, you've made an assumption there about the self, which is difficult to defend. He just avoids, you know, like some kind of ninja manages to find a way to phrase these things without ever taking a stance that is basically attackable on any of these issues, which could sound like being evasive, but that's not what I'm talking about, right? And also, he's almost never going to elicit the sort of wounded kind of reaction that you'll get towards a spiritual teacher, right? So he's almost never going to say, look, calm down, and then elicit the reaction, wait, what do you mean calm down? I mean, you don't know what I'm going through. Like, blah, blah, blah. He's almost never going to overreach that way. He's always going to be like, you know, if you can find a way to find some calmness, right? That kind of thing. He's always going to be really cautious about what he says. And that's a fresh breath of fresh air. And it's also hilariously boring. It's, you know, refreshingly boring. And yeah, there's just this one moment that's always stuck in my mind. He's just there going, and it just really seems to capture a lot of what he's like as a person. He's just like, so if I could just suggest, put forward, offer up for inspection, and you're like, just fucking say it. And then what does he come up with? He says, like, maybe you could spend a little bit less time worrying about what's going to happen to you in the future. And you're like, come on, man. So you see what I mean? Like that's what he's like. That's what his personality is like. And it's so endearing, right? And that's why I call him the most boring man in the world. But the real reason, the last reason I came up with that nickname is fully tongue-in-cheek, right? So there's this one talk he gives in which he describes, like the build-up to death, right? And he's like, you know, maybe you should practice letting go. In any given moment, just whatever is there, whatever really pressing thing seems to be happening, whatever distressing things seems to be happening, just try to let go of it. Practice letting go of it. And he says, because, and then he this is pretty much the only time I've seen him talk about this huge issue in Buddhism, which is what you do in the moment of death and how the massive existential implications that has, right? Especially with the doctrine of rebirth. You know, if you handle your death in the wrong way, then in the next moment your mind clings to a new body, and onwards and onwards and onwards it goes, right? So it's one of the only times I've seen him address this topic directly. And the way he does it is just like, in that last moment, when the mountains are closing in, it would be such a shame to still be holding on and clinging. And in that last moment, when all you have is that one last breath before the mountains close in, it would be such a shame. Right? When all you have is one moment left, it would be such a shame to spend that moment in anything other than peace. One of the first steps in the traditional Buddhist practice of satipatthana, of the establishment of mindfulness, the foundations of mindfulness, one of the early steps there are the charnel ground contemplations, right? So contemplating your own mortality, contemplating the degradation of your own body, right? So a few months into my own meditation practice, I was at home, following along with Bhikkhu Anālayo's introduction to the Satipatthana Suttas. And, you know, I was really getting into it, right? You know, one breath, okay, it's one breath closer to death. You know, one heartbeat, okay, it's one heartbeat closer to death. And of course you start to panic a bit, but then, you know, you sort of breathe with it, you calm down, you calm down. And then, you know, you start to find everything slowing down, kind of trending towards blackness. It was sunset, right? So it was starting to get dark. And, it's, you know, over time it starts to feel as if the space between the heartbeats is getting longer and longer and longer. The space between the breaths is getting longer and longer. The breath is becoming more and more sort of smaller and smaller and smaller. I start to go darker, you know, I start to go deeper and deeper into darkness, right? And just, you know, staring straight at death. You know, okay, my death is getting closer, it's getting closer, and everything starts to slow down and slow down and slow down and slow down. And then blackness, right? And then some undisclosed period of time later, I get to that point where it's just like, you realize I haven't actually taken in a breath for a while now, right? The space in between my breath has gotten very long. I haven't taken a breath for a long time. And then, on the out breath, you start to try to take in a breath and you come across some tension, right? There's some constriction in my chest. And I realize that, oh my God, I don't have the strength to push my chest out again. I'm not going to take another breath. It's over. It's done. I can't push the space out around me. So in the Theravadan Buddhist understanding, there's these 4 meditative states called the 4 formless absorptions, 4 formless meditations, the 4 arupa jhanas, right? One of which is the realm of infinite consciousness, infinite awareness, the other one being the realm of infinite space. And so once you start to sort of explore those, there's a sense of boundless spaciousness in your mind, a sense of boundless consciousness. At that point, you get this very large sense, very expansive mind, right? And so in this moment, as I'm going deeper and deeper into this death meditation, it feels as if it's not just like my chest is constricting, it's like the very space around me is starting to come closer, right? So my mind is expanded out into everything that it's, my entire life has been the expansion of my mind out here and there, expansion of my experience going here, seeing all these things. And now, up until the point where you get to this really, really boundless states of consciousness. And now it was all going to get sucked back in. And it really felt like mountains were coming in. It just felt like the edges of the universe were expanding back out, right? That, so it's not just, it's all over, but it's all over coming at me with a sense of constriction at tremendous speed from the furthest possible away, right? Going from complete boundlessness to complete boundedness and about to be crushed by it. And then I open my eyes and my heart's going at 1,000 miles a minute, having pretty much a panic attack, right? And then you look outside and it's deep night, it's darkness, and you're there, you don't know where it's going, and it slowly starts to come back to you. Okay, that was a death meditation. Okay, fine. It starts to kind of come back to you. So all that to say, that's what happened to me after a couple of months of meditation. Fronsdal's been meditating for 45 years, right? Right? And so when he says something like, when the mountains start to close in, right, it would be such a shame in that last moment to... That comes from certain experience. That comes with a certain weight of experience of meditation, right? And so that's what makes them so interesting, right? The fact he's so matter-of-factly able to talk about and talk around such extremely heavy, potent, scary things. The fact he's able to be so matter-of-fact about it is why I call him the most boring man in the world. All right, that's probably enough introduction about him, enough talking about him. Let's get to a little bit of meditation practice. All right. So the first thing he'll usually have you do is to assume a meditation posture. Sit down, take your position, and have it be a position with some amount of dignity to it, right? A sort of relaxed uprightness, Hold yourself in such a way as if you're allowed to be there, right? Have the posture you take be an embodiment of legitimacy. That you're fine, this is fine, you're allowed to be here. First thing you do is bring your attention to the breath. And as you do that, you can keep an eye out. See if you can find any ways in which the breath is constricted. And see if you can just allow that to relax. Anywhere around the belly, or the shoulders. Or see if you can just, take an in-breath up until the point where it's comfortable, and then on the out-breath sort of release some of that constriction. And see if in that releasing of tension around the breathing, if in the very release there's a way that you could sit slightly more upright, slightly more present, in a dignified way. Okay, so then as you bring your awareness back to your breath and back to your body, you can have a look to see if there are any points of obvious tension in the body. And you can just hold those in awareness. Simply be aware of them. Now, perhaps that's enough. Perhaps in simply bringing your attention to that, that's enough of an inducement for the body to, by itself, without you doing anything, to start to relax itself. But if not, with the breath, you can make some kind of conscious intention for it to relax. Okay. Now, if that's enough for it to relax, then good. If not, then you can try to relax one step further up the line. So if your shoulder is tense, you can let the shoulder be tense and just try to relax your arm, or your neck, or your back. So one step further back. And if that doesn't work, then one step further back. Try to relax that. Here's this very nice image of, imagine if you're in a room with someone having a panic attack. And if you can't do anything to help them with a panic attack, then just let them have the panic attack, but with lots of space. Okay? Try to relax the space around the tension. Try to give it the tension as much room to be tense as it wants. So relax the space around the tension. Okay. Now as you do this, try to see if you can do something which he calls relaxing the thinking muscle. See if you can find anywhere in the space of your awareness where there's physical tension, physical holding associated with the process of thinking. Okay. So for me, a lot of it tends to be around the left eye. But it can get very, very, very subtle, right? It can be in the shoulders, it can be anywhere, right? But typically, a lot of clenching around the muscles of the face, which have a lot to do with, showing emotion and kind of communicating with others, and they can store a lot of excess tension. So try to see if you can find where in your body you hold tension associated with thought, and see if you can relax that. And what you'll find is that as you do that, it becomes easier and easier to notice when you've gone off into thought, because you'll notice that part of the body starting to clench. And as you come back, and each time as you relax it, you'll find that you'll be able to stay in the present moment, stay with the breath, stay with your body for longer. You've hit upon this spot where awareness of body starts to go off into thought, and you're able to kind of pull it back, right, with this thinking muscle, with your attention to this thinking muscle. And what you find is that the more relaxed this thinking muscle is, the shorter the amount of time that you'll wander off into thought, and also the quality of the thought starts to change, right? The less stressful the thinking starts to become. So long as you're thinking like this, you can go into some pretty stressful directions. So long as you're thinking like this, even if where you stray, even if you start to daydream, even if you start to wander, it's to a slightly easier place. Okay, so then let's try to combine all this with relaxing the space around the tension and relaxing the thinking muscle. Now, try to see if you can relax the space around the thinking muscle. Okay, so maybe the space behind your eyes, where you feel that you're seeing from, or where you feel that you're perceiving from, or where you feel that you're existing in. Is there any tightness, and at this point it stops to become fully physical, right? Is there any tightness in the quality of the awareness itself? Okay, so again, is there any tightness in the skull, the scalp, the face, which you can let go of? But then is there any tightness, as it were, tension or urge towards stressful thinking in the mental space itself, right? In the very fabric of the consciousness, which if you need another physical tip, it could be there around behind the eyes, inside where the area where the brain might be, but it can go pretty much anywhere, right? At this point, we're starting to hit upon something very fundamental, right? Very subtle. We're starting to relax the awareness itself. And then a lot of his approach is about learning how to be aware in a relaxed way. Whatever it is that you're aware of, so long as you're able to have relaxed attention towards it, and then we're starting to get where we want to go, right? That's the direction in which liberation lies. So you see, through this gradual process of relaxation and introducing ease, very skillfully, very subtly, we're able to get at very fundamental, very deep-lying areas of the mind where tension can be held and which can contract towards negative headspaces and negative avenues of thought. Another thing he's very good at is just see if all this emphasis on this tension, or see if you can find anywhere in your field of awareness, somewhere where you have enacting clinging, where you're starting to generate suffering, where you have pain. Find that. But then also, over time, you broaden your awareness such that you can hold that in awareness while also holding something else. So if there's somewhere where you're tense, find also somewhere where you're at ease. If there's somewhere where you're stressed, find somewhere where you're stable, where you're at peace. If you find yourself agitated, the agitation is there, but there's somewhere in the mind which isn't agitated. And simply holding those two things in awareness, and then allowing slowly the second, the calm, the stable, the ease, to surround, then permeate and start to melt a little bit, that first one, or whatever. Again, hold it at least, in a kind way, in a gentle way. So that's the kind of thing he would tend to emphasize in his guided meditations. And if you found this useful or interesting, you can check out the Insight Meditation Center. I'll include links below. And I'm sure you'll have much to gain from his approach. Now, what else? What else could I include? So he has a very nice bit in which he talks about the practice of mindfulness, practice of meditation, like removing a pebble from your shoe. Okay, so it gives the image of, all right, so let's say you're going off on a hike for a few days, and you've just started the hike and you realize you have a pebble in your shoe. Well, at this point, it would behoove you to, it would be altogether to the good for you to stop. It would be totally worth your time for you to stop, take off your shoe, and remove that pebble. Because if you're going to be hiking for 3 days, if you're literally like 10 meters away from home, fine, you can keep the pebble until you get home, take off your boots then. But if you're beginning a 3-day hike, it would definitely be altogether to the good to take out that pebble. And mindfulness and meditation is like that, right? Like, if you're really, like, if the doctor's just told you, sorry man, it's over, you got another 72 hours, then depending on your views on the afterlife, like, whatever, right? But if you plan to be here for a while, it would behoove you to start doing that now, to sort of take away those points of deep-seated pain and tension. That way, everything you do in the future would be done in a slightly better way, right? And so he gives the image as well. He's like, well, if let's say you're going on like one of those very long-term hikes, from like across the Americas or something, at that point, you find that, like really expert hikers, they'll find that the particular kind of sock you're wearing, it's not even a pebble, it's like a crinkle in the sock. No, that's too much. That's going to start to cause an abrasion, and that'll start to become a problem. Not just a problem for you, a problem for anyone you're traveling with, right? Imagine, being on a hiking journey, and then 2 days into the hike, someone starts to lag behind, you have to carry them, it can become a serious problem, not just for you, but for other people, if you're carrying excess weight of agitation and suffering. So especially if you start to think that there's anything after the physical death of the body, at that point it becomes absolutely imperative. That is the number one thing for you to do at that point, right? To start to turn to your mind, and to start to turn your mind into something pure, right? To sort of get rid of the gross imperfections, the serious liabilities that you're carrying in your psychology. That, depending on how long you think you got, that becomes absolutely imperative, right? And basically, he likens the process of meditation to sort of becoming aware of subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler things, right? So the first time you stop, you notice that hunk of rock, and then you realize, actually, wait, there's a pebble, and then actually, there's a grain of sand, and hopefully this shouldn't become too Princess and the Pea stuff, but still, you start to find this subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler areas of holding, areas of tension. And he's one of the most skillful people I've come across in sort of guiding you through that gradual process of finding where it is that things are wrong, so you can really be at ease in this world. So, God willing, I'll have a chance to do a full discussion, full video on the Metta Sutta. But just briefly, I guess his political philosophy, his way, the way that Fronsdal will recommend that you be in the world is towards, realizing that you don't have to do anything particularly grand to change the world for the better, right? He'll emphasize simply finding a way to be at ease, be calm, in a way that you can be an easeful and calming presence there for others, right? In a stressed and agitated world, to be not stressed, to be not agitated, is a gift. It is itself an act of bettering the world, right? So you bring that motivation for helping others into the practice in some way, but in that way, not in a massive way. Just finding that, simply being, finding the way to be loving and caring in your own being, in your own self. Then you're able to sort of bring that into your communication with others, right? And then your words can be a gift, your presence can be a gift. Right? I guess a lot of spiritual teachers will emphasize that point, but he's very consistent about it, right? And convincing and reassuring in that way, right? Reassuring that it's to your benefit to find a way to find calm and ease and peace, right? And that can really be of benefit to others too. That's a very simple process of letting go of, being able to live with yourself. Can be something to be aspired to, right? That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do with one's life, right? So if nothing else, if all one's done that day is to introduce slightly more ease, right, then one needn't necessarily have any grander ambitions than that, right? That's enough, right? And then, sure, anything else on top of that, right? Oh yeah, and then about the pebbles and things, the lovely thing he said at the end of that was, he was like, as you go through this process of going to subtler and subtler points of pain, it can be very scary, right? You're addressing these things which, had been there for a while, and especially if you start to peel the layers back, you start to see how much, fear and whatever horrors there are inside, right? And he's like, early on in sort of meditation practice, it can start to become really like, is this going to be like, is this going to go on forever? Just every time I sit down, more and more and more, And he's like, in that way, starting meditation practice, it can be a bit bad news. I love the way he said that. It can be a bit bad news. Meditation can be a bit bad news. Yeah, and he talks about how like one can become very tentative, especially in the early stages, right? For someone like me, who's a fairly inhibited individual in many ways, to become even more inhibited. Because everything you say, everything you do, you're training yourself to not just go the way your mind normally wants to go, not just fidget when you want to fidget, not just start thinking of something else when you're trying to focus on the breath. You're constantly training that your mind to sort of hold itself back and simply be aware, so that when you do start going back and acting into the world, there can be a major you can really hold yourself back a lot, right? So to have him address that, right, to have him address that openly and say, yeah, it can be a bit tricky. So I found that tremendously reassuring. And again, it just goes to show that there's very little grandiosity, there's very little pomposity in how he presents himself, and how and there's a great deal of honesty in how he presents the spiritual path and the path of self-cultivation. Right?
Okay, couple more things. So I remember him once saying a beautiful line. He's like, maybe it's not you who becomes liberated. Maybe it's everything else that gets liberated from you. I love it. And yeah, another very, very good observation is that he's like, talking about time. So he's like, all right, so you're sitting there, you're meditating, and some memory comes up. It's a very painful memory, perhaps even a traumatic memory. And he makes a wonderful distinction, which is that, look, the events that happened in the past is indeed the past. So you drop the memory and you go back into the present moment. Okay. But the suffering that you were experiencing during that memory is in the present moment. That's in the present. Okay. So the event to which the memory refers, the scene which is playing, sure, in the past, whatever that is, and that you can drop. But the discomfort in that scene, that's now. That's right now. Wonderful distinction. So when you drop the memory, when you fuse back into the flow of present moment breathing, right? Fine, let the images drop away. Let the little scene, let the colors go away. But then don't just ignore that memory came up to tell you something, and that something was, I'm currently in pain. There is ouch now. So when you come back to the present moment, obviously stabilize yourself a bit, but then say, hold on a second. Where is that discomfort? Where is it? Where is it here? And then you address that here, right? Excellent insight. Truly excellent insight.
Okay, all right. I reckon that's probably enough on the topic. The reason I bring all this up is that it's not super likely that I'll ever commit fully to being a Buddhist. It's not super likely I'll commit fully to being a mindfulness teacher. So the least I can do is, if you are interested in these things, to give you my best recommendation. Now, of course, there's even more hipster choices, where you can go to Ṭhānissaro or to Anālayo for more traditionalist Theravadan teachings. There's, I'm sure at some point, Keren Arbel is going to become a massive superstar in these circles. And there's there's dozens of other people working in the world, right? But if I had to just pick one, it'd be him. All right. And then to sign off, I guess I can't really do better than signing off the way he does, little dong dong with a little meditation bell. And then, may all beings find peace. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. And may all beings be free. Cute idea.